Still in Mozambique, just days ago, Cyclone Chido swept through the country's coastal regions, leaving devastation in its wake, with winds reaching over 150 kilometers per hour, leaving families displaced and livelihoods disrupted. We assess the impact of Chido, even as it's clear that this cyclone isn't just a standalone event. It is part of a larger pattern of extreme weather that has been increasingly impacting lives, a pattern driven by climate change. Meanwhile, reports indicate that many Southern African countries are enduring sweltering temperatures, affecting agriculture, health, and water supplies. Farmers in regions are struggling to cope with prolonged dry spells followed by torrential rains, marking the new normal. To discuss this further, we are joined by a senior agricultural economist, Thabile Nkunjana. Nkunjana, thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Thanks for having me, and the listeners as well.
So, Cyclone Chido seems to wreak loads of devastation across Mozambique and the agrarian lines in southern Africa. How bad is it for the communities affected?
Because this is such a situation that's just occurred. Our communication is that there's still been some assessments that are being made, mainly because there has been some cuts off in terms of the power lines, and that has affected negatively the communication. And of course, the issue of infrastructure is another big problem because, the officials, both from the NGOs and the state, are kind of struggling for now to move and just to assess the number of, key areas that have been impacted. But at least preliminary reports are projecting that there has been quite some damage in the part of Cape Delgado in Mozambique. And of course, I think at least there was one person that was announced dead. I think around 30 also have been injured. Of course, another incident has occurred as well in Malawi, where I think 3 people have been announced dead. So for now, there's been some bit of complications in terms of having a necessary assessment of the entire situation. But the numbers that I just gave you, those are just some preliminary reports that have been reported.
That's quite sad. Now, is there a difference between Cyclone Chido and the previous cyclones that have cut across the region?
So the issue now is that we are seeing an increase in these occurrences. So you will find that whilst the countries and their areas that have been impacted by the previous one, they are still recovering in terms of building the infrastructure that was destroyed. You find another one reoccurs. So now this is developing a strain for the governments to be able to sort of build or rebuild the region and also the areas that have been negatively impacted. Because for now, if we are to look into Chido, the countries that have been for now been mainly impacted, it is Malawi and Mozambique, as I said, with at least nothing has happened or reported from Madagascar, even though the cyclone did touch part of the country, but at least at a lower level. So there's nothing that was reported as far as the damages. And then with the Chido one, a number of warnings have been issued, including one that is for Zimbabwe and several countries, including Eswatini, Angola, South Africa. They are at least focusing that maybe the next few days we'll probably see that as of today, especially for Zimbabwe. So as far as the damage is concerned, and also to compare the cyclones that we have experienced, for this one, because it has only impacted at least 2 countries severely for now, so you cannot necessarily compare it to the ones that we previously observed. But given the fact that, for instance, it's reported that in Mozambique, you might see again, another incidences related to the Chido. So perhaps then we will be able to say the damages once the estimations and the calculations have been put together, and then the reports are being reported, then we'll be in a position to say this has been or has more significant or damage compared to the previous ones that we have seen. But the reality is that the intensity of the cyclones is increasing, because even if you have to look in terms of the numbers of their intensity is quite different if you have to compare it to the previous years with the current periods.
We're actually talking about climate change here, I must say. But then, is there anything that the government in Mozambique is doing to reduce the impacts, and of course the causal factors, most especially for these climate issues?
I mean, all the nations, at least the majority of them, including Mozambique, they are aware because almost every year, especially because from the period of November to April, almost every year we observe, or that country, including Madagascar, for instance, they experience some sort of a cyclone. So by the mere fact of that, they are aware that almost every year about those certain periods, because they've been data and research have shown that about 85% of cyclones that happened in Madagascar and Mozambique, they happened between November and April. So therefore, the state or government is aware of which periods that they should be able to have some measures to be able to deal with this. Now, this is in terms of the responses. And then as for the other measures in terms of trying to deal with the climate change, this is something that even the recent G20 that currently South Africa is going to be leading is up next year. Is something that is being brought up because it has been something that is brought up in terms of it having a negative impact on the overall climate, and all countries, including the government of Mozambique, they are aware of the fact that it needs to sort of move towards better practices that are going to sort of combat the impact of the factors that are sort of increasing the climate change related matter. So these are something that I think all the countries are doing, and Mozambique is aware of it. As a result, they also have funding that is available. I think for now, around $4 million has been put aside to actually deal with the current situation for now.
Okay, so Thabile, you're a senior agricultural economist. We are talking about climate change, sweltering temperature, torrential rains, dry spells. What is it looking like for farming season looking into next year, and of course agribusiness in Mozambique and the surrounding southern regions?
The reality is that the climate change is something that we are observing. For instance, I was talking to some colleagues just outside Mozambique for now in Zambia, where they are fearing that they're going to probably have another dry spell. The same thing is reported in Zimbabwe, that there are fears that it looks like the rains that were anticipated are not necessarily coming in. The same issue is also, of course, going to be around all the countries within the southern region, including Mozambique. Because remember, as much as we do have some reserves in terms of infrastructure to have waters and all that, you realize that there are certain areas that these incidences, they impact different areas at different levels. And also, if you are to look into specific countries, you'll find that specific areas producers are dominate in producing maize, for instance. And then you find that the other areas are producing something different to that. And therefore, those commodities, they require different, resources, natural resources, be it enough water or the soil that is there, it is not as good. So the reality is that the actual sector is being negatively impacted. And this is why, for instance, if you had to look for the previous summer that we are coming into the production that we've seen, as a result, we are talking about the shortages of maize in several countries, with some of the countries declaring, the disaster, state of disaster, including Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So the reality is, as much as this is happening in Mozambique, it's not an isolated matter. It is affecting the entire Southern Africa region. As a result, the country is based on their needs and, of course, their production in terms of their commodities that they produce and the scale of the actual sectors.
Okay, so finally, Thabile, before I let you go, I know that there have been talks, in the global community around climate financing, but a lot of them have not been redeeming their pledges despite several years of talks. Are there other actions that Africa can take to mitigate the impact, pending the time the funds start coming in?
So the reality is that Africa is, of course, going to be affected by this, but I think the another issue is that we need to look in terms of how the African continent is, how big it is in terms of its production in agriculture and the effects that the climate change is having. as much as they are African countries that have signed, they are signatories for for the Paris Agreement, that they are declaring that they are to be part of all the measures that are being implemented to deal with climate change. It is going to differ in terms of the countries. Remember, Southern Africa is one of the countries that are very poor in terms of them getting to stick to all these requirements. Be it is to stick to the to the agreement themselves, so that they can be able to sustain themselves, or at least address their internally agricultural production. Or even other. Remember, as much as agriculture is one sector, it gets to be infected by a number of other things, and this includes the infrastructures, the politics, across the region. You're seeing the conflicts and all that. So, as much as this is something that needs agency, Africa is still quite prone to a number of other issues that affect it to be quite focused on the climate matter. But of course, this is something that the heads of states, they cannot manage to overlook or ignore. It's something that requires their attention, and therefore all the measures that are being taken globally, Africa needs to incorporate itself into those measures, so that at least the impact or the severity of the climate change gets to be dealt with accordingly.
All right, Thabile Nkunjana, senior agricultural economist from South Africa, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We hope Africa will get it right.